Alan Wake 2 is the sequel to Alan Wake and follows Saga Anderson and, of course, Alan Wake as they work together across worlds to escape the darkness that has surrounded them. The game is available on the Epic Games Store, PlayStation 5, and Xbox Series consoles.
Time to talk show tonight. Waking up in places with no memory of how I'd gotten there. It was out of control. I didn't need another mugshot in the fucking tabloid.
Atmosphere. In Alan Wake 2, the real world feels more sad and remorseful than the previous game, with Bright Falls being substantially less bright. Its forests are overgrown, and even things that are new feel like they've been left and abandoned for quite some time. It's a type of decay that comes from age, not necessarily neglect. The well-kept environments like the nursing home are visited at night, and this electric feel engulfs them. There's something wrong. The forests are hiding something, and everyone knows something but you. And this sense of distrust lurks under the game. The overlap is where things stretch out into the surreal. It's more tense with FMV videos played over the progression to represent being in two places at once. Laughing voices and mysterious visual distortions playing over things like a dream that's breaking apart to reveal something worse underneath. The game's atmosphere gets progressively more abstract and menacing the further down you go. As opposed to Saga's real world, Alan's dark place is a mind-bending miasma with its changing terrains and perpetual night. The New York cityscape turned hostile monster. The scroll of the subway wall graffiti are written like they're talking to you, like they know you. It's bewildering, familiar but shapeless. It feels like you're being watched and toyed with. Because you are. Shadows lurk around the place, ominously watching you struggle from a distance. As you rewrite, the scenes go even darker, yet the jazzy undertones still remain. The pulsing, shifting movements of a warped cop story that keeps coming back to drink another glass of whiskey and lament about the crimes taking place in this nightmare.
Okay, let's talk about the murder victim. The lady who was killed in the climax of the play.
The leading lady.
And then it rains, and nothing is washed away. That's one Harry Mason. Scares. Being mostly psychological horror, the game's scares don't come a lot from traditional things, like combat and jump scares, but these things are still in there. Shadows in the dark place can sneak up on you and strike you, and the screen will show jump scare images that are like a visual representation of a headache or a jolt of pain.
Shit. Careful, Saga.
But the game's main horror comes from the creeping, unsettling feeling the environments and story give you. The environments keep looping and deteriorate. The shadows evaporate and say, "I'm drowning," as they fade into nothing, which I still find disturbing, like I'm hurting something. It gives it a human side and makes you doubt yourself. The story gives you the feeling that you're toying with things you don't understand, but also that your actions are ultimately hopeless to begin with, and you're fighting your way out of an iron lockbox with a plastic spoon. You can leave a few scratches, but you're still inside.
And he projects himself out to this dark dream of New York through the story he is writing. Like astral projection. Did I get that right?
Yeah, that's exactly right.
The live-action sequences are unsettling because you know they're a setup. The game's various boss battles are unnerving, but only one or two are straight-up frightening. The game has chase sequences too, which can be pretty intense, but it's the one or two moments that stand out the most as truly frightening and amongst the creeping feeling the whole game exudes. Whilst not traditionally scary, it doesn't need to be. That's 2 Harry Masons. Sound design. Everything from the voices of the characters to the sounds of gunfire, the electric shock jump scares, the background audio, the sound of seagulls and the wind through the trees, it's all excellently recreated. The soundtrack that backs it up is tense and menacing, and it goes far beyond what many other games would, with the old gods of Asgard being more important than ever before, and their music not only playing a part in the story, but also contributing to the more awesome feel to some of the combat sections and surreal moments. The game's soundtrack, especially the chapter songs, are incredibly done and well acted. When it comes to voice acting, again, the game is fantastic, with Alan and Saga both sounding very impressive and convincing, alongside Alex Casey in all of his iterations. There weren't really any half measures taken with any of the voice acting at all. Even things like using Saga's mind place to interrogate Taken provided some chilling audio clips of the evil beings to creep you out.
You're in over your head. Next stop, Caldera Street Station.
The threshold, like a doorway.
The sound space and reverb were immaculately immersive in headphones, and generally, the game sounded incredible. That's 3 Harry Masons.
All clear, Estevez.
Gore. Shooting Taken results in a bloody mess, with shotguns blasting chunks out of them, and whilst the visual fidelity on the PS5's performance mode was limited, it still looked pretty nasty. There's also gory story moments, with the opening really starting off with the bang. The gore, whilst in the story, isn't a huge part of it, but really makes an impact when you do encounter it. That's 4 Harry Masons. Story. Following the events of the first game, 13 years later, FBI agents Saga Anderson and Alex Casey arrive in Bright Falls following an alleged ritualistic murder, which ties in a case they're chasing. However, after the body gets up in the morgue and attacks them, their world is turned upside down. The main story can be a little hard to follow, but it's doing its best to pull the rug out from underneath you, with plot twists and parts where the main characters themselves don't understand what's happening. Classic psychological horror. And while Saga's side of the story is easier to comprehend with their mind place and caseboard allowing you to go over everything so you understand what's happening, Alan's side is more confusing and interpretive, with the live-action sections where Alan is interviewed by Mr. Door on things he swears he hasn't written, asking more questions than it really answers, but it does still try and explain itself by bringing Alex Casey, his fictional character, into existence time and time again in alleyways and bloodstained hotels to evaluate the events.
Stepping to the murder site, I'd felt it, hanging in the air. A meaning, the violent emotion of the act, like a cloud of wrath. The dead eyes of the victim staring at something you couldn't see, and yet making you aware of it. Something had soaked into this place on a molecular level, overlapping with your meaningless existence. Regression to something you had managed to forget, marking you, taking you for a ride, making you crazier.
A lot of the confusion comes from uncertainty about what's real, what's predetermined, and what can be changed. And when I first played this without playing the first game, it was near incomprehensible to me. There's still diary entries, manuscript pages, all voiced by Alan, and people telling you about things going on. There's TV commercials and posters, scrolling on the walls in the subways, and books left laying around that all tell you something about the world. It's a masterclass in environmental storytelling, and whilst the story itself can be hard to grasp, it's definitely worth trying. Making the final score 5 out of 5 Harry Masons. Whilst I didn't enjoy the first game a great deal, the second game was endlessly appealing once I'd beaten the first. Its surprising twists and turns were really interesting, and its parallel to Twin Peaks was stifled by the road it takes on its own. Horror-wise, certain moments left me more amused than scared, but it's a 25-hour game and it covers a lot in that time. Again, I'd like to remind you the whole thing is down to my opinion in horror games, and if you don't share this opinion, then that's cool, I get it. I'd like to point out that whilst it's a spiral, and not a loop, I
was calling you. Did you hear me? I lost my way.